Welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video we're going to continue talking about APIs, which allow you to get data from sort of outside or third-party sources. They give you access to their data through not tapping their database directly, but through API calls. So it allows you to connect to their database in a secure way that they can control and that you can't mess everything up. And so I've been using APIs to pull in data for different apps that I've made and things that I've been testing. And one of the core functions is pagination. And I guess I just didn't put enough thought into what I need to do for that. But here lately I've come across just sort of a simple way for you to add a sort of a lazy loading or a load more button to make another call to the API to pull in more data. Most free APIs are going to give you a limit. There's a limitation about how many pieces of data or items come in through one call. So they use pagination to sort of control that flow of data going out. So it's a really important function, being able to either do lazy loading. So there's a trigger and either that call is made automatically, or there's a button that you click. So there's some sort of event that triggers another call to the API, and or you have a previous next sort of setup. And maybe I'll I'll do something a little bit more complex later on as another video, but in this one I just want to show you sort of a simple load more button that when you click it, it just makes another call to the API and brings in page 2, and then when you're on page 2 it brings in page 3, and etc. until you run out of pages. So we have our setup here. This is taken from a previous video where I had used the Unsplash API to bring in just a group of photos. And what it's doing now is it's making a call to the API, and then it's outputting those results, the image URL, into an image div, which is this, and then it's just sort of stacking those on top of each other. If you look at it responsively, that was the point, was to make a responsive grid, but that's not really the point of this video. So what I've done is I've limited per page, I've only limited it to 5. You know, I could do any number here. So instead of 5, it brings in, you know, just the 3 images or whatever number you want here. I think it goes up to however many are brought in through the call, through the initial call. So I'm going to set it to 5, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. If we go to the website itself and we look at our inspector, you can see that I'm console logging the initial data that's being pulled in. So if you go in here and we do this is the data object, and you can see here that there are 5 results. So we've limited it to 5 results on our page. There's a total of 900 results. So we're looking at 5 out of 900 images that are brought in through our query, which is Chicago. So we're using the keyword Chicago, and with this call there's 182 total pages for these 906 images. So what we want to do is we want to sort of look at this total pages, and because it's more than one page, then we can page through all of those pages. We have 180 clicks essentially that we can make before we run out of all the images that's in that data. So what we want to do is, this may not be the most efficient way. I'm sure someone who's better at JavaScript, or if I just thought through it a little bit, there's probably a more efficient way to actually sift through this data object and just do the next 5. But I'm going to show you a real quick and dirty way, and it's going to be sort of a hit if you have a really popular app, or if there are a lot of people who are going to be hitting the load more button. So you're going to have to find a more efficient way, but if your apps are like mine and you get 30 people a day, you're probably not going to reach your limitations on your API. So just keep that in mind. If your app goes viral, you're going to have to find a more efficient way to do this. But this is just to get you up and running, and we'll go over some different techniques to sift through that data object later. So we have all of our components here to bring in all the image information that we need and the data from the API. And what we need to do is we need to do a couple things. Let's go up to the HTML and we'll create our button. So it's just load more, and then we're just going to put a button that says more images. So you can see when we create that, we get our more images button down here. And let's just add a few styles to that before we get into the JavaScript. Sorry, I've called it load more button down here. I already have some styles written. So when I apply those styles, we can see that our load more image or button comes in down here, and it's just a button, so when you click it, something should happen on the screen. So we're not using an A tag, we're using the button tag. And give it a little margin, we're just aligning the button to the center. So in this div here, we're aligning everything to the center. And then just no background, a little border, a little padding. And when you hover, there's going to be, it turns to a cursor, a pointer, letting you know that that's a link, something you can click. So that's where we are with our button. So the button is styled. And when we look at our API, where we're using Unsplash API for this particular call, this is a documentation for the Unsplash API, the developer documentation. And if you look down here, it's called pagination or pagination. So the per page and the total give the number of elements that are returned on each page. We just looked at that. And you can see here that when they make the call, it's to /photos, and then one of the parameters here is page. So page equals whatever, right? So simply we can come into our call here and we can add that as well. So after our per page, we'll say and page equals 1. Okay, so that's the default, that's what's going to load is page 1. But notice if we change this to 2, then it's going to load in a different set of images. You see these images are different because this is page 2 of the call that we made, and this is page 3. So we get even more different images. This is page 60. Remember, we have 182 pages, so there's a lot of pages. So all of these photos are broken up onto page 60. What we want to do is, you can't expect the person to come in and just change this code every time when they want to see the next set of images. So we want to make this number dynamic, and the way that we do that is we create a variable. So this is the way we do it. We break up our string with the double quotes. You can use the single quotes or the actual double quotes, but we have quotations, so you could just as easily use double quotes like that. And then you do 2 plus signs. Actually, for this one you can't because we have our single quotes here, so I think you're going to run into issues. Let's just stay consistent. We'll use our single quotes. So single quotes, and then we say plus, and then we need to put our variable name. We're going to call it page. Put another plus sign, and what this does is it concatenates whatever this value is into this area right here. So what we want is we'll create a variable called page, and the page is going to be equal initially to 1. You don't even necessarily have to have that because the default for this call is going to be 1, so you can see that we don't necessarily need to make that explicit, but I will make it explicit. So we save that, and now the first time that we make the call for this function, then it's going to bring in page, and page equals 1. So what we need to do is when we click this button, we want the page to go to the next page. So page 2, page 3, page 4, etc. And the way to make that happen is we need to put all this first. We need to put this into a function. So let's go ahead and do that now. And we're going to say function. I'm just going to call it getData. You might want to use something more clever if you have multiple functions for getting data. So I'm just going to cut this and paste it in here. And now our function is to get the data. And you can see over here that it's not running anything, because once we enclose it inside of a function, this function will only run if we actually run this function somewhere. So we can come afterwards and we can say get data, and then it'll run our function just outside here. Or we can run this function based on a particular event. So right now it's just the load event is happening. When the page loads, it runs this function, which is what we want to do. And we also want to write another function, and the other function is for our load more button. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, this is just an anonymous function. I'm going to say the load more button on click. So we're going to attach a click event handler. So when we click it, we want to run some particular anonymous function, which is going to go inside of here. And what I want to do, I want to run get data again. I already know I want to do that. But what I also want to do is I want to make sure that this page variable gets incremented 1 every time that we click the load more button. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say page, not equals anything, but page plus plus. So anytime you want to increment a variable by 1, you just can put plus plus. Same thing if you want to decrement it, you just put minus minus. And so right now when I click the load more button, page is going to equal 2, and then I'm going to run get data, which means that this page is not going to equal 1, it's going to equal 2. And every time I click the button, it's going to go from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. And so every time I'm running this get data, it's going to a new page. Now this is not an efficient way to roll through this data source, okay, through this data set necessarily, because you have a large object here, and it might be okay, but there are 182 pages for this particular API call. Okay, so it may not be the best or most efficient way, but it is going to work. So what we have is our page variable. We have our function called getData. When we click the load more button, it increments our page variable to the next highest number, and then we run getData again, and so it goes to page 2, page 3, page 4, and then it runs this function which appends whatever page results, the next 5 essentially. It appends those to the grid, and we should have 5 more images that come down. So when we come and we test it, we say more images, we click, it makes the API call, and then it appends or attaches it to the end of this grid element, which means that we're just attaching new grid items to the end of the element. And every time you click here, remember we have 182 pages that we can sort through. Every time you click a load image, it's going to go out and get the next 5 on the next page, which makes for a super simple, like lazy loading sort of thing. So you can get a lot of images. There's a lot of images in your object, but you're not outputting 900 images to the page, which would be a huge data suck for someone if they were on their mobile data. But this way, you're sort of controlling how much data comes out and how much of the page that the person consumes. And we can see it in real time up here on a large screen. I think I must not have I don't have the most common viewport here. For some reason that wasn't attached. So when the page loads, we get our initial page load, and then we come down, we click our more images, and then it makes the call and brings in the next 5, right? And these are the same exact images because we're making the same query. If we came in and we changed our query to a different value, change this parameter to New York, then all of a sudden when we make our first call, we're going to get images of New York, hopefully. Okay, so you can see we have images of New York now. There's the Empire State Building, and in this object there are 9,800 pictures, pages. So 9,000 photos, 1,800 pages, and we're getting them 5 at a time. So you could be here for a pretty long time clicking and bringing in new images and seeing those images of New York, which, you know, maybe that's the experience you're going for. Maybe you just want to give people a lot of options if they want to do that, and you know, you could be here looking at images for 10 minutes before you get all the way through. And just looking at the sort of hit that it takes on the API. Every time you're doing that, it's making a call to the API, so it may or may not be making a ton of requests. You can see here that today's February 20th, right? So we're making quite a few requests here. This is this test app is being used somewhere else, but you can see I'm closing in on my requests that are remaining for this hour. So that's what I'm saying. If you get into a sort of situation where it's not a production app and you just have sort of a free API access here, then you know, I'm limited to way less than 500 or 5,000 requests per hour. I'm at 50 just with this free test app. But you know, if you apply with Unsplash and you meet their requirements, they'll bump it up to 5,000 requests an hour, which makes this way more feasible for someone to be able to go on there. Already have an application that's pulling in an image from the background, so you know, it's already being taxed a little bit, this particular app. Alright, so that's how to create a super basic just load more button, and this could say whatever you want to say, or it could just be a little down arrow. Right now you could confine it to the button itself. Right now if I click outside, remember this is all a div, so if I click anywhere out here it's going to trigger it. I could have kept that trigger to the load more button like that, and then when I click outside of it, nothing happens. So I'm clicking right now, and then when you click on the button, then it gets triggered. So if you want to just sort of confine it to this particular button space, then that would be okay too. Or if you want to attach some sort of data to this so that you can track it better or whatever it is. Alright, if you have any questions, please leave the questions in the comments below. I'd love to get your thoughts. If you know a better way or a more efficient way to do this that's still simple and sort of an easy thing that you can implement, then please leave those comments down in the comment section below. Otherwise, you can use this particular methodology for, let's say, you know, when you scroll down to this area here, you know, you get to right here on the page, and then you come down farther, it can automatically run this get data. Right now we're doing it on click, but you could do it based on window scroll position, and it just lazy loads the images in so that the user never has to do any sort of interaction. But if you want to track these button clicks, or you want to track how many times this gets called, you can do that. And like I said, you could use a forward and back sort of system just by incrementing and decrementing the page variable. So that's how we would do that. All right. Like I said, leave your comments.